Good morning, I'm Sarah Gannam, filling in for Taylor Wilson. Today is Tuesday, February 13th, 2024. This is the Excerpt. Today, Donald Trump makes another attempt to delay his criminal trial on charges he tried to overturn the 2020 election. Plus, President Joe Biden is trying for a ceasefire in Gaza while sending aides to apologize to the Arab American community in a key swing state. And border politics ramping up yet again. Former President Donald Trump asked the Supreme Court yesterday to continue to delay a trial into whether he tried to overturn the 2020 election while he appeals a lower court's ruling that he's not immune from prosecution. My colleague Dana Taylor spoke with USA Today reporter Maureen Groppe about what this request might mean for Trump's federal criminal trial.
Maureen, thanks for hopping on.
Happy to be here.
What was the argument that Trump's lawyers made in their filing yesterday?
They argued that this is a huge issue, this question of whether a president has absolute immunity from prosecution. It's a big issue that the Supreme Court has never decided before in this type of circumstance, and that they must do so because the lower court got it wrong. A 3-judge panel on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals said that Trump did not have absolute immunity and can be charged criminally.
If the Supreme Court declines to delay this trial, how quickly might this federal case move forward?
The earliest the trial could probably happen is in May, but a lot of that depends on how quickly the Supreme Court makes their decision. They can do this on a expedited schedule, or they can draw things out.
And then if they do side with Trump's lawyers and agree to delay the trial, is it even possible for that trial to finish before the election in November?
It's possible, but it depends on how the Supreme Court, whether they want to do this on a fast track or whether they want to treat it as a normal case. If they treat it as a normal case with a normal amount of time given to both sides for filing their briefs to the court, and then they schedule it on their calendar the way they would normally schedule cases, the trial would not start and certainly not be finished before November's election. But they could agree to delay the trial for a while and set up an expedited schedule for both sides to file briefs and then for them to make a decision about whether to even hear the appeal.
And when do we expect Trump's attorneys to file their immunity appeal, which could also derail the whole case?
That depends on what schedule the court gives them in response to this emergency request to pause the trial. The court could say, okay, we'll pause the trial, but we're giving you this deadline to file your appeal. Or there's a chance that the court could treat this petition sort of like a request for an appeal and sort of decide both things at once.
Maureen, when do you think we'll get their decision on yesterday's delay request? What comes next?
What probably comes next is that the court will ask the special counsel for a response to Trump's filing. And then once that happens, the court could make a decision very quickly, possibly by the end of this week, some experts think, but it's more likely to be next week or after that. But it just depends on how quickly the Supreme Court wants to move this forward, either, one way or the other.
Thanks for sharing your insights here, Maureen.
Happy to help.
Meanwhile, in Georgia, a judge has ruled that evidence exists to possibly disqualify the Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, who has charged Trump in a separate criminal case related to the 2020 election. A Fulton County Superior Court judge will hold at least 2 days of televised hearings starting Thursday to decide whether or not to remove the DA because of her romantic affair with the special prosecutor who she hired to oversee the case. Trump's lawyers are seeking to have both Willis and prosecutor Nathan Wade dismissed and the case thrown out entirely, but the judge cautioned that he will not tolerate attempts to smear the prosecutors' reputations with unproven allegations. Willis and Wade have already admitted in a court filing to having engaged in a personal relationship or romantic affair and made the case that they did nothing wrong. They feel the high-profile prosecution of Trump and his 14 co-defendants should be allowed to proceed. At an emergency hearing on Monday, the judge said it must be decided whether Willis got any financial benefit from the relationship, something that was alleged last month by a former Trump campaign official. You can follow all the latest developments at usatoday.com. President Biden said he's working on a deal to pause the fighting in Gaza for at least 6 weeks. That would also allow for the release of hostages. Speaking at the White House after a meeting with Jordanian King Abdullah II, Biden said the ultimate goal is to build something more enduring.
The key element of the deals are on the table. There are gaps that remain, but I've encouraged Israeli leaders to keep working to achieve the deal. The United States will do everything possible to make it happen.
Meanwhile, Biden dispatched several advisors to the crucial swing state of Michigan last Thursday, where they admitted to mistakes and missteps, both in how the administration has talked about the Palestinian people and how it's handled the war in Gaza. This all happened during closed-door meetings with politicians, faith leaders, and community advocates in Dearborn, Michigan, the city with the highest percentage of Arab Americans in the U.S. But one activist who was present at the meetings told USA Today it's a grave insult that will have political consequences in the upcoming election. Many community members are urging Michigan voters not to vote for Biden in next week's Democratic primary and instead cast a vote for uncommitted. Many Arab and Muslim Americans have been demanding Biden call for a ceasefire and have said publicly that he no longer has their support. While Biden aides met with leaders behind closed doors, about 50 protesters gathered outside, many waving Palestinian flags and chanting "Ceasefire now" and "Stop the genocide." The protest was peaceful. Political rhetoric around the U.S.-Mexico border is likely to only intensify this presidential election year, with both candidates now talking about, quote, shutting down the border. But what does that really mean? I spoke with USA Today national reporter Lauren Villagran to learn more. Lauren, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thanks, Sarah.
Lauren, Joe Biden has recently pivoted to using rhetoric similar to what Donald Trump uses about shutting down the border. How are people who are living near the border reacting to that?
So I got a range of reactions, everything from one professor at the University of Texas at El Paso saying that kind of language is truly terrifying for border residents, to others who are so used to hearing heated rhetoric around the border that they quote unquote roll their eyes. At the same time, border residents lived through a very real time of severe border restrictions that many in the US had no idea they existed. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Trump administration shut down the border to Mexican nationals who carried a tourist visa. And this divided families along the border. Many families here have members who are either U.S. citizens, dual U.S. and Mexican citizens, or who may just hold Mexican citizenship, but who have a border crossing card. And those folks, for nearly 2 years, couldn't cross the border. And it was really disruptive. So people have a real memory of that. And it left a sour taste in their mouth.
What does it even mean to shut down the border? What does it mean for the economy?
So full disclosure, I live on the border. I live in El Paso, Texas. That's where I report as an immigration reporter. And, the border is not something that can be opened and shut like a drawer. In El Paso, for example, there is a 30-foot border fence that stretches the length of the urban footprint and extends well beyond. There are asylum seekers that try to cross the Rio Grande and turn themselves into border agents, and that is a process that I think politicians are trying to tighten or shut down when they use that language. But at the same time, every single day, hundreds of students cross the border to go to school in El Paso, and in some cases in Juarez. Folks work on both sides. Americans seek medical care on the Mexican side of the border. And, Mexicans cross the border to shop in the U.S. So, to turn that off or to shut that down is not something that you could do by decree, and it would be extremely disruptive. I should also mention that last year, Mexico eclipsed China as the United States' largest trading partner. The trade between the US and Mexico topped $800 billion. So, millions of jobs in the United States depend on free-flowing trade.
In your article, you wrote that people who you spoke to who live near the border say that politicians 2,000 miles away in Washington just don't get it. What is it that they just don't get?
I think the rhetoric is used as a sort of political play. It does seem that in a presidential election year, everyone wants a piece of the border politics pie. Border communities know better than any others the economic and emotional cost of repeated humanitarian migrant crises. I hear from people on both sides of the political spectrum that they want to see solutions that won't leave people hungry and unsheltered on their doorstep, while at the same time, treating people humanely. Congress has not acted, as listeners have probably heard me say more than once, in decades on immigration or border security reform. And the latest attempt, also failed.
Lauren Villagran, thank you so much for this reporting and for talking to me about it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Super Bowl commercials have always been a big hit, depending on who you ask, maybe even bigger than the game. And while the play on the field Sunday night went right down to the wire, the commercial lineup had one very clear winner. In USA Today's Ad Meter, a poll that's been letting fans pick their favorites for 36 years, the State Farm ad featuring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito came out on top. The 60-second spot features Schwarzenegger as a State Farm employee in an action film. But the Austrian-born superstar is struggling to pronounce the insurance giant's tagline. That's when his longtime pal, Danny DeVito, steps in for a surprise cameo. The ad outscored a Dunkin' Donuts commercial featuring actor Ben Affleck and his wife Jennifer Lopez alongside Tom Brady and Matt Damon. You can check out Ad Meter and see how all your favorite commercials ranked with a link in today's show notes. And before we go, today is Mardi Gras, also known as Fat Tuesday. It's a celebration on the last day before the start of 40 days of Lent. Thanks, as always, for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio. And if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Sarah Gannam, filling in for Taylor Wilson, who will be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.